Welcome to Beyond Transcripts, the podcast for educators who want to meet and exceed best practices in transcripts and education management. When it comes to your transcripts, consistency matters. We're back with Matt Bass, founder of Transcript Maker, as he sheds light onto why consistency is so important and some best practices for your transcripts. We talk about the different ways that your transcript can be inconsistent, how you can find some consistency, what could happen if you don't actually have that consistency, and things like branding and course titles, and how Transcript Maker can ultimately make that a little bit easier for you. So stick around as we get into why consistency matters and best practices for your transcripts. Matt, I'm excited that you're back on the podcast with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Okay, let's dive in. We are going to say this word a lot today, I think, consistency. So when it comes to transcripts, what are some of the areas that are important to think about in terms of being consistent?
Well, where to start? I think the best place is with just the overall look of your transcript. When somebody glances at it, when it's sitting on a desk or a table, what do they see? Hopefully they'll see your school logo and maybe some branding. If your school has special colors, maybe some of those. But if there are several different transcripts from different students from your school sitting on the table there, it should be obvious at a glance that they're all from the same school.
Right.
So the structure and the colors should all be very, very similar.
Right.
And most people are able to achieve that one way or another, but the amount of effort required is what's interesting to talk about.
Yeah. And it's funny, as you said that, what do you see? I thought of that book, Brown Bear, Brown Bear. What do you see? I see an inconsistent transcript looking at me. You don't want to see, those colors that look different between each other. You don't want to see probably even, lines that are shifted, like one row, the title's here and then it's over here and grades, mismatched. So that would be an interesting book. A little spinoff.
Yeah.
So we're talking about things like colors, branding, probably consistency with titles of classes, the overall look, probably making sure, it looks clean, right? In terms of even just spacing consistency. Any other areas to think about that people might not realize, I should probably be consistent in this area with my transcript?
Yeah, well, design and positioning is very important. Just accuracy in general, is a part of consistency, because you want to make sure that your school name is spelled the same way and has the same initials and that kind of thing. You want to make sure that the course names don't have any typos between transcripts. That could be bad. You want to make sure that if you're displaying like a GPA summary or a credit summary, that those look similar, that the columns are the same. If you're starting with the course name and then you have the GPA next for that course, and then like a summarizing column, you want those in the same order. Accuracy of the grades and the GPA itself is very important. You want to make sure that that's consistent across transcripts. And then even things like the formats of dates and phone numbers, because there are different ways to format those things. And you want to pick one format and stick with it across your transcripts.
Right. And I'm curious because, schools might know this, but I don't. So you said there's different ways that you could format dates, or, probably there's ways you could format different parts of the transcript. Are schools expecting it to look one certain way, for example, in regard to dates, or are they just expecting consistency across the transcripts that come from one particular school?
Well, if it's a U.S. school, then they're probably looking for, month, day, year, the traditional way that we format dates. But beyond that, I don't think they're looking at anything specific. But it just helps your school look better if you're using consistent date formatting.
Right.
Because if somebody is looking at 3 or 4 students at once and the dates are formatted differently across different transcripts, they're just going to wonder, like, why is that? Why can't they be consistent in this little area?
Right.
So.
And you mentioned titles as well. So I would imagine, if someone were looking side by side two students from your school, obviously they would expect to see the same title of courses. Does it matter how schools are titling their courses? I can imagine that there's a number of ways you could call sort of an earth science class, right? You could be very sort of basic and direct, or you could get a little fancy with what this course is called. Is there, again, I'm thinking from the school's perspective that students are applying to, are they expecting those course names to look a certain way? Do you know?
Well, there are certainly general course names that a lot of schools are going to use for courses, like math, algebra 1, algebra 2. Those are pretty commonly used. So sticking with those commonly used course names is probably a good idea. If the course content deviates beyond that, then you can certainly get a little more creative with the course name, and a college that's looking at the transcript isn't necessarily going to have a problem with that. But if there's any question about whether or not they're going to have a problem, you can always attach a list of course descriptions to the transcript, where you kind of go into a little more detail about what a particular course involves.
Okay.
But by and large, it's good to stick with the general course names, and that helps improve the consistency of your transcripts as well.
Absolutely. So we've already touched on a lot of areas that schools or that families would want to be consistent in terms of creating their transcript. What happens if there isn't consistency? What if these areas are popping up in the transcript? What might happen?
Well, anyone who's reading the transcript is going to wonder why that's happening. I mean, spelling errors and GPA errors are huge for obvious reasons, because that's going to make everyone question the accuracy of the transcript overall. Right. But minor consistency errors can make people question the accuracy as well. Going back to the date formats, if they're seeing that the date is formatted differently between transcripts, they might wonder what else is different. Are these two course names that are slightly different on each of these transcripts a cause for concern? Because are the courses truly that different, or are they really the same course, the same content, but the name was just slightly different?
Right.
It just puts questions in people's heads.
Yeah, and that's a disservice for the student who's ultimately trying to get into that school. And, the student really doesn't have control over the transcript generally, right? I mean, maybe in a homeschool family, the student has some involvement in making sure everything is correct and accurate. But in a larger organization or school, those transcripts are typically just sort of sent off, and student can't do anything about it unless maybe they catch it and can go back to the school. But that would be frustrating for everybody, I think.
Yeah, it would, which is just another great reminder to, if you're able to, try to involve your students in the transcript creation process. Because like you said, as a homeschooler, that's certainly easy to do. But a lot of schools just kind of handle it for the student without any input from them. And it might be nice for them to have some input and to kind of see how the process works.
Yeah, absolutely. So more on the school side, how does that consistency help the school and those creating the transcripts? This is probably true for a homeschooling family as well, but I'm thinking, schools or individuals who are responsible for many transcripts that they're overseeing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, from an administrative standpoint, if you have, hundreds or thousands of students going through your school and you have one transcript for each of those students, I mean, that's a lot of paperwork to keep track of. If a student later contacts you and needs a copy of that, or has a question about a grade or a course that they did or didn't take, you're going to have to go look that transcript up and figure out an answer to their question. It's going to be a lot easier if all of those transcripts have a consistent format, so what to expect, what to be looking for, where the information is going to be, and what format it's going to be in. Just makes it a lot easier to find stuff.
That's always nice when parts of your job can become easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think, both the creation, the keeping track of, the finding information later on, all of that definitely becomes easier for the school. And I would imagine that it just makes them more efficient, right? That they're not spending as much time and therefore as much money to do these things that could be easier. So,
yeah, that's very true. Very true.
And so we've touched on this, but why is consistency important for those who see the transcript? Anything we haven't covered yet? Because obviously getting into college is very important for students and the schools or the families that are preparing them for their college admissions. So when someone is sitting there looking at the transcript, let's just revisit that consistency and its importance there.
So when someone like the student or their family or...
Yeah, so when the school's actually looking at the transcript and if the consistency isn't there, why does that matter for the student? Why should we be, because I could see where it'd be easy, like, oh, it's okay. This title's slightly different. It's fine. But,
Right.
we have to remember these transcripts are going in front of someone who is reviewing the student. So why is that consistency so important at that almost like final stage of where the transcript goes?
Yeah, well, from the college's standpoint, again, there might be questioning the accuracy of the transcript if it's not consistent. From the standpoint of your student and their family, if it's a private school, they paid to attend your school, and the transcript is kind of the culmination of that in conjunction with a diploma, of course. But the transcript, shows all the work they did at your school, and if it's not accurate, if it's inconsistent, if things are not aligned properly, if the logo is missing, it reflects poorly on the school. It's a bad look, and your student might be frustrated about that. They spent all this time at school, they worked hard, and they want to see a representation of what they did, and it's disappointing.
Absolutely. And I think as a school or a parent, you would hate to have any sort of inkling that your transcript hindered a student in getting to where they want to go. And you mentioned, which I think is really important, is that it's not just that particular student, but it speaks to your school and the credibility of your school. And that admissions person may keep track of that and kind of, remember that moving forward. And that's not good for your current students, your future students, or your school. So,
right.
You've touched on this, but this idea of branding, again, I think sometimes people think, well, it's just the information, right? It's just the class names and the dates. But let's talk about branding, both in terms of the consistency and how important that might actually be when you're sending your students' transcripts to different schools.
Sure. Well, certainly you want your logo on every transcript, and you want the print quality to be consistent. You want the colors to be consistent. You don't want, to be printing your transcripts on a poor quality printer where it's not going to look the same. And you certainly want your school name to appear consistent between transcripts. So we've had a lot of school customers in particular who they can't seem to make up their minds about how they want their name to appear. Whether if they're incorporated, do they want the ink at the end or do they not? Do they want to put a comma after the school name before the ink or not? Do they want a period at the end of the ink? Between their website and their business cards and their printed material, the name can appear, 3 or 4 different ways. And it's a small detail, but it's one that people will notice. And, it's a good way to demonstrate that you do care about detail, to make those things consistent.
Right. That's so interesting. I actually would never have thought about that. That would be so hard for people to, sort of find that consistency with. But I get it. Like, oh, the comma, should it go here? Do I have the period? And I could see where that sort of detail could fall through the cracks. Like, well, maybe we've got it figured out on the website, but then the transcript comes along and now we're second guessing it. Or we thought this is how it was on the transcript and it's different on the website. So yeah, that didn't even occur to me that there could be those, lack of consistency across those different areas where schools will ultimately show their branding. Now, obviously you understand the struggles with consistency. And that's one of the things that Transcript Maker has really worked hard to do, is to help with that consistency. So share with us about how you make it much easier for schools to be consistent and easy for their users when it comes to transcripts.
Well, Transcript Maker is consistent in the way that it allows data to be input, for one thing. A lot of schools who move to Transcript Maker have been used to creating transcripts by hand, usually using spreadsheet of some sort. And the problem with spreadsheets is you can do your best to define where everything's going to go up front and put all the alignment in, and put your borders in, and then copy that sheet to a new sheet when you have to work on a new transcript. But the fact is, in a spreadsheet, like, nothing is locked down. Everything could be changed, either on purpose or accidentally. And so that's not helping the consistency.
Right. And it's those accidental changes that are the worst, in part because you don't always realize you've done them. And then there's really no way to make things consistent if you accidentally changed something somewhere. So exactly. Yeah. And I know that, one of the, speaking of changes, is what happens when someone needs to make a change? What happens if a course title changed, or they want to make a change to how they're formatting? Your software really allows them to make those changes easily. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, like I said, the data entry is very consistent. So we have, specific form fields that you fill in for a course, for example, the name, the credits, the grade, and it's filled in the same way every time. And once that data is in our system, then we can take it and we can produce a transcript using either one of our default templates or a template that we customize for your school. And it's going to look the same way every time, because all you're doing is entering the data. You're not actually like defining the formatting or the borders or the alignment or where everything goes. That's defined in the template and the template that we provide you, and it's going to be the same every single time. And what's cool about that is once you have, hundreds of transcripts in the system, if you ever decide you want to change your template, like your school logo changes or the colors change or your name changes, maybe you change the way that you're grading things, we can change the template for you. And so not only will all your new transcripts reflect those changes, all your old ones in the system will as well. So you maintain that consistency even for old transcripts that students may want to see.
That's great. And then is there a way to maintain consistency? Let's say a school goes from semesters to trimesters. Obviously, the previous students were on semesters and the new students are on trimesters. Can there still maintain consistency with the old transcripts, but consistency with new transcripts?
Yeah, you actually have a choice at that point. If you want the old transcripts to also be updated to the new organization, you can do that. If you want them to stay the way they are, you can do that too. So it gives you the option there without you having to necessarily go back and like manually update all of those by hand.
Right. Yeah, because I was thinking, again, if you're using some sort of manual system like a spreadsheet, you kind of have to figure out, okay, which of these do I want to change and which one do I don't? And let me find that cell where this thing existed. And yeah, we'll add a link to our conversation about how it's time to upgrade from manual doing of all of this work, because that just doesn't sound fun. I don't know why people would do that. So I think it's great that, obviously we're biased, right? But obviously there's a much easier way to do this. So any final thoughts in terms of consistency before we wrap up today?
Just to make it a priority. It's easy for, going back to the school name and where the punctuation marks should go and that kind of thing. A lot of folks just don't think about it or don't care. But you should be thinking about this, and you should care, because it's this little attention to detail that's going to be important, and that helps your school achieve the professionalism that it should have. So don't ignore it.
Yeah. And I could see that easily happening, right? It's like there's so many things we need to focus on and worry about. And the priority is the students and getting them the education they need. But it's also a priority to show off that education in a way that's professional and consistent, so that your students can go on to whatever it is they're going to do with these transcripts and do great things.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
All right. No problem.
You're probably now convinced how important it is to be consistent in your transcripts. And we know this isn't always easy because you're busy and you have a lot going on. But again, it's a priority and something you really should think about. And if you need some help with that, Transcript Maker has a 14-day free trial for you. If you'd also like to learn more tips, ideas for not just your transcripts, but education and schooling, don't forget to join our newsletter.